a very warm welcome to the Nationalist Madrasi. Today we have a very special guest all the way from Australia with us. None other than our India's favorite professor, Salvatore Babones is joining with us. Namaste. Hello, Salvatore ji. Thank you for your valuable time and joining. Thank you for joining with us, Salvatore ji.
Namaskar, Mahadev.
Okay, so also congratulations for this Indian Centenary Roundtable. I think you are meeting the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is hosting the meeting, and you are also meeting the Prime Minister over there. Congratulations
No,
as
no,
well.
no, 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 no. But Prime Minister Modi is coming to Australia to do a big stadium event with members of the Indian diaspora. We'll be there. It's a lot of fun to get to see him in person. I saw Mr. Modi speak in Uttar Pradesh in Lucknow a few months ago, but of course that was in Hindi. So I'm hoping he says a few words in English since he'll be here in Australia.
Okay. So, advance congratulations for us, for you, Salvatore ji. Salvatore ji, in this interview, let's discuss about the Quad as well as the other AUKUS or other things in detail, as well as the foreign policy of India after 2014 or before 2014. So let's discuss about that in detail. Let me start
Right.
with the Quad. So, do
Right.
you think in today's date the Quad is still relevant on what idea it has started?
No. The Quad is no longer what it was started as. The Quad was started as a maritime security organization with the four Indo-Pacific countries that were primarily active in maritime security. It is not an alliance of all democracies. After all, South Korea and New Zealand are not in it. It is not an alliance of all maritime powers. Vietnam's not in it. It is an alliance, or I should say, an alignment of the four major maritime democracies of the Indo-Pacific, Japan, India, Australia, United States, but that's been eviscerated. It was first eviscerated by U.S. President um, sorry. Joe Biden. Sorry, I can't remember. You have to cut that out for you. I can't remember the name of my own president.
Sure.
Yes, I'm kidding. U.S. President Joe Biden, when he first came to office in January 2021, he downgraded the Quad. Now, in no official sense, you'll never see downgrade in any official communique, but he transformed it from a maritime security grouping to one focused on three issues, and none of them were security. The three issues were fighting coronavirus, fighting global warming, and regional development. And there's really no reason for these four particular countries to be involved in these three particular issues. So I think he was signaling that he didn't want to confront China with the Quad. If you think about it, fighting coronavirus, fighting global warming, promoting development, there's nothing anti-China in that. Whereas maritime security was definitely seen by China as a confrontation, that the Quad was confronting China. Now, similarly, in April 2022, Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison was defeated in an election. Anthony Albanese became the new Prime Minister. He's on the Labour side of politics. And he also wanted a rapprochement with China. So again, although he's said nothing officially opposed to the Quad, he embraced the Biden program of downgrading it from being primarily security focused to being a grouping that would not offend China. Now, on top of that, there's also been a changeover in the political situation in Japan, where Shinzo Abe became ill. He had a temporary prime minister Prime Minister Suga, and now we have Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Japan. Now, while they're all in the same party, they're all Liberal Democrats in Japan. The Quad was really Shinzo Abe's personal idea. He was promoting it right from the beginning. It was his baby. And the new prime minister, while again not officially downgrading it, doesn't have the same passion for the Quad. So of the original Quad, really only Narendra Modi is left standing. And the other three, while they're still maintaining the grouping, seem to have no real attachment to it, don't want to use it to promote maritime security, don't want to confront China with it. So I think we can safely say the Quad has become one of those zombie organizations or zombie groupings. it exists because nobody wants to officially announce that they're discontinuing it, but it's not actually doing anything.
Okay, okay. So, as you said, it is the baby idea of Shinzo Abe as well. So, after Abe's illness or his death as well, so can we say that the Quad has become a little slow or little inactive as well?
Well, the Quad is still quote unquote active. It simply is not doing anything with that activity. So take fighting coronavirus. I mean, fighting coronavirus, yes, when Joe Biden came into office in January 2021, that could still be seen as a major international priority. But at this point, coronavirus vaccines are plentiful. I mean, he had announced with big fanfare in 2021 that there would be a Quad developed vaccine, and that each of the Quad members would do its part to promote a regional vaccine. The United States was supposed to provide the intellectual property. Japan was supposed to provide manufacturing know-how. India would provide the actual manufacturing, the pharmaceuticals, and Australia. Get this, Australia would provide its branding expertise because Australia is excellent at branding. Australia would sell the product in the region. Now, that's a forced idea, right? The idea that it's almost like a trope for each country. What is the best of each country? And we'll put it together. And of course, it never happened, right? There is no Quad vaccine because there's no need for a Quad vaccine. India has vaccines. The United States has vaccines. There's no point to it. And that's really, I think, a symbol for what the Quad has become. It simply exists because it exists. It doesn't exist to do anything.
Okay, okay. So, do you think like what is the angle of or what is the view of China of the Squad or the so-called AUKUS or the so-called grouping? So, what is China's ideas or views on this grouping, Salvatore?
I don't think this grouping has any anti-China substance to it anymore, and I think that's by design. I think all four, well, certainly Anthony Albanese and Joe Biden, but also Kishida in Japan, don't really want to confront China with this organization or with this alignment. It's not technically an organization, with the result that it has become emptied out. Of course, India still has its serious, border clashes and problems with China and the serious threat from China. But the other three countries seem committed to downplaying the China threat. I mean, you can see this symbolically. Everyone heard the story of the Chinese weather balloons, the Chinese spy balloons sailing across the United States. And Joe Biden didn't even want to acknowledge it. First of all, he said there was no such thing. Then he said that it wasn't from China. Then finally he acknowledged, yes, it's from China. And he symbolically shot one down because he's the U.S. president. He can't just let this happen once it became public. He doesn't want to confront China. Confronting China was a Trump policy, and he wants to distance himself from Trumpism. And so he wants to be seen. He can't be seen in the U.S. as conciliating with China, but I think he does not want to be seen as being anti-China. Now, on top of that, the Biden administration has a serious scandal on its hands with Hunter Biden, the president's son, his involvement in business dealings in China, on which he flew on the vice presidential jet to China. This is all very sensitive, so I'm sure Joe Biden does not want to have a China problem on his hands.
Okay.
But
Okay.
with that, I mean, and not just Joe Biden, Anthony Albanese in Australia has been lobbying hard to have China end its informal trade sanctions on Australia. China has been prohibiting the import of Australian products like wines, for example, informally, without making any announcement that it was doing so. He's very much trying to have those bans reversed. Again, he does not want to confront China. Really, it comes down to India being the last one standing against China. Nobody else currently seems to be interested in confronting China using the Quad machinery.
Okay. We came to know that Quad meeting is also cancelled, by the way. So, what was the reason and what is the way forward for this Quad? Let us discuss about the other things in detail as well. What is the way forward for this Quad groupings or Quad meetings in the future as well, Salvatore?
The Quad meeting technically hasn't been canceled. It's been rescheduled to be held in Japan on the sidelines of the G7 summit. But even having the Quad in Australia the actual Quad leaders meeting that was scheduled was not really the real purpose for Joe Biden coming to Australia. Joe Biden was coming to Australia to address a joint session of Parliament on a state visit to Australia, the Quad meeting just being essentially tacked on to that. Now, Biden had to cancel his trip to Australia because of the budget situation in the United States. There's a There's a reauthorization of the increase in the U.S. debt ceiling. The U.S. debt has a congressionally mandated ceiling, and repeatedly Congress must vote to raise the ceiling, or the U.S. would theoretically default on its debt. So Joe Biden has to be in Washington for those negotiations. But what this really is a political problem for Anthony Albanese. Joe Biden is actually very popular here in Australia. Anthony Albanese saw it as a political coup that he would have, Joe Biden, leader of the free world, coming to address Parliament on his watch, right? So this was a big get for Anthony Albanese. Now, getting Narendra Modi is still a positive for Anthony Albanese. I'm sure he wanted Mr. Modi to continue his visit, and Mr. Modi's visit is continuing. But it's not quite the same get electorally for him as having the U.S. president visit.
Okay. Salvatore ji, there is a talk going on about the changing world order as well, because post Russia Ukraine war, or as well as the post COVID era as well. So one side, China is having an upper hand on all these issues, and on one side, Russia is having an upper hand on all these in their platform as well. So what is America doing in all these areas? Because Trump was one such person who has denuclearized North Korea as well, and Trump was there for each and every. Trump was very keen on negotiating the Kashmir issue between India and Pakistan as well. So it's not like it's a bilateral issue between both India as well as Pakistan. But Trump was very keen in initiating, or let's say, a global leader who has wanted us participation in each and every one which is happening in the world. Let's say, is Biden really active as that much Trump was there in his during his tenure, Salvatore ji?
So first, I think it's a mischaracterization of the Trump administration. The Trump administration, if anything, was criticized for pulling back from the world. That is, for not wanting to be involved in every area in the world. And I think that its attempts to pull back were constantly countered by the simple fact that there is strong demand, both internationally and within the U.S., for the U.S. to be involved everywhere in the world. So, for example, when Trump wanted to pull out of Afghanistan, he faced very strong resistance both within the U.S. government, but also in Europe, that is within NATO, and in the region, trying to get him not to pull out of Afghanistan. So this idea that, Trump had a muscular foreign policy, Biden less so, I think this really is all just window dressing, or it's just ripples, waves rippling on top of it.
At least Trump tried to some of an extent, right?
No, I mean, I think there is just much less to that than we would think. The U.S. position in the world is structural. It's not driven by individual leaders. It's driven by the post-World War I. And no, that's not a mistake. The post-World War I world order, that from the time of World War I, the U.S. has been deeply involved all around the globe, and World War II only cemented that. So after in World War I, the U.S. troops went out to the world and came back. By World War II, the U.S. troops went out again and stayed. But not just U.S. troops, U.S. bankers, U.S. corporations, U.S. interests. So the era of the multinational corporation really goes back to the early 20th century, well before World War II. There were already U.S. interests globally. These interests are not going away. So the U.S. continues to be involved all around the world. Whether that's good or bad is almost beside the point. All of us have opinions about that. Whether it's good or bad, the simple fact is that it is. And any U.S. president must deal with crises anywhere in the world. Joe Biden found that out in Ukraine. Inevitably, the U.S. was drawn into the Ukraine crisis. The U.S. is inevitably drawn into Middle Eastern crises, and certainly in East Asia, the U.S. has been present since the late 19th century. These trends, I mean, when you see trends that are more than a century old, they're not going to disappear overnight, no matter who's in the White House.
Okay. So can we say that if Trump was there and he would have handled the Russia-Ukraine war in a different manner, can we say that?
I think you can absolutely say he would have handled it in a different manner. Whether it
Okay.
would have been a better manner or a worse manner is hard to say. Trump himself insists that there would have been no Ukraine war had he been the president. I think there's some credibility to that assertion. That is a lot of the, one of the big reasons for war is perceived weakness. That is when someone like a Vladimir Putin perceives a weak opponent, that dictator will then take advantage of what he perceives as the opportunity. Now, the Trump administration was very actively arming Ukraine. So the idea that Trump was friendly to Russia in this scenario, I think we can discount. That the whole Trump-Russia connection has long been debunked. The Trump administration was actively arming Ukraine. When the war started, the first thing the Biden administration did was offer to evacuate the Ukrainian government from Ukraine. That is, they were convinced Ukraine was going to collapse. Now, how the Trump administration, first of all, would the Trump administration have continued arming Ukraine to the point that Russia would not have attacked? I don't know. Would them arming Ukraine have prompted Russia to attack Ukraine? I don't know. I think it's impossible in these scenarios to second guess history. So I think we can safely say, yes, it would have been different under a Trump administration. We can't ascertain whether it would have been better or worse under a Trump administration.
Okay, okay, okay. So, we could see that the or let's say the chemistry between President Trump, as well as Prime Minister Modi. Can we? Are we missing those chemistry in between President Biden as well as Prime Minister Modi?
I'm not convinced that personal chemistry matters for much in international relations. And I'm also not convinced that anyone really knows, did Modi and
Mm.
Trump get along? Who knows? I have no way to know whether or not that's the case. What I do know is that US policy priorities under Donald Trump matched much more closely with India's policy priorities
Mm.
than US policy priorities under Joe Biden. So under Donald Trump, the US was
Can
very.
we say that the Republicans' policies match more with the uh,
No, no, no.
government rather than
The
the
Trump
Democrats?
the Trump policies. This wasn't
Okay,
Republican Party policies. Actually,
okay,
um, Trump was fighting against the mainstream of the Republican Party and against his own national security advisors in his India outreach. So this was very much a Trump policy, was to confront China, a full court press, as we call it, the entire U.S. and allied team pushing against China, and for him getting India on side with that was very much part of the U.S. policy of exerting pressure on China. It wasn't so much an India policy as it was a China policy for which India was instrumental. The Biden administration has wanted to reduce the tensions with China, and towards that end, it has not seen the advantage of relations with India. I think, if anything, U.S. relations with India at this point on the U.S. side are driven primarily by the desire to sell defense equipment. So they want to sell F-35. I mean, there's a reason the F-35 was featured at the Bangalore Air Show last year. If not the F-35, then the U.S. at least wants to sell F-18s to the Indian Navy, and get Boeing have a bigger presence in India. Aside from that, there doesn't seem to be much interest among the Biden administration in India relations. In fact, its choice of an ambassador for India, who has been an outspoken critic of India's human rights, if anything, shows that the Biden administration is just not that concerned to keep India on side or to keep Indians happy.
okay, okay, okay. So, are the Indian-US relationship normal? I mean, the way back we see, as you said, Trump's policy was so closer to India as well. So, policies and relations, I differ. I mean, I differentiate both the things as well. So, do you see that the India-US relationship is same as it was in 2016 to 2020?
There are certainly more challenges in the relationship now. The Biden administration is much more likely to be um, to have to give an ear to allegations of human rights abuses in India. Now, there are alleged human rights abuses everywhere in the world. The question is, where does the administration pay attention to those allegations? And I think the Biden administration is paying marginally more attention to them in India than the Trump administration was. Now, there were people in both parties trying to get the U.S. president and more particularly the Secretary of State to condemn India and to put India on a watch list for international religious freedom. During the Trump administration, that pressure came from Christian evangelists in the U.S. who wanted greater freedoms for Christian missionaries in India. During the Biden administration, the pressure comes from international Islamist groups who want to condemn India because of their larger international program against India and Israel. It's no surprise that the current U.S. ambassador at large for international religious freedom is a Muslim, and that he specifically, when citing India in the International Religious Freedom Report a couple weeks ago, that he specifically cited Indian human rights abuses against Muslims. And I say it's no coincidence because if you actually go to the report, more than 98% of the alleged, and I emphasize these are alleged abuses, more than 98% of the alleged abuses are abuses against Christians. Yet in making his remarks, he cherry-picked out an example of an alleged abuse against Muslims. So India gets it both ways on human rights with U.S. administrations. I think the Trump administration simply didn't listen to the Christian evangelist complaints, whereas the Biden administration is more receptive to the international Islamist complaints. Muslims are in a solid Democratic Party voting electoral bloc in the United States. Hindus are a mixed bag. I mean, leaning Democratic, but also very large percentage Republican. And this all has to do with internal U.S. politics, not with international relations per se.
Okay. So before going to this other things on India as well, so let me ask you a question on the next presidential election, which is coming at the I think year end of 2024, if I'm not wrong.
November 2024.
Yeah. So who will be the presidential candidate, or who will be the next president as well? Salvatore G for the United States.
Oh, you want a prediction?
Yeah, just say. Because you are one person who is analyzing the world politics. I just want to hear from you.
Yeah, look, the honest answer is nobody knows.
Okay.
If you want my personal bet, if I had to bet on one horse right now, I would bet that Donald Trump would likely win the 2024 election. Now, to get there, he has to win the Republican primary. There are a lot of Republicans who are never Trumpers, vehemently anti-Trump. They will try to stop him. But I think his popularity in the Republican Party among the Republican Party voters is so great that he'll win the nomination. Remember, in the United States, it's not like other countries. In the United States, we select our candidates. We don't just vote which candidate we want. We select who we want to be the candidate through a primary process. And that's why I believe the U.S. is fundamentally more democratic than just about any other country in the world, because we choose our own candidates, not just choose which one we want. We actually choose the candidates. Now, the Republican Party, even though the Republican Party infrastructure, the leaders in the Republican Party would desperately like to dump Donald Trump, the Republican Party voters want Donald Trump as their candidate. And so unless he suffers some terrible mishap over the next year and a half, he will become, or over the next year, he will become the Republican candidate. Joe Biden's situation is much more difficult to gauge. He is the official Democratic Party candidate. The Democratic Party has more of a top-down structure than the Republican Party. It still has primaries, so the people still influence it, but in the Democratic Party, the party establishment has a much greater number of votes. They have a system called, quote unquote, superdelegates, which is there are people who get a vote for the Democratic Party nominee simply by virtue of their position, being in Congress, being a governor, in the Republican Party doesn't, which means that the Democratic Party is more an establishment top-down party than the Republicans, but still the majority of votes come from the Democratic electorate. The Democratic National Committee does not want to have primaries. I mean, it has to have primaries. It does not want to have competitive primaries. However, Joe Biden has been challenged by Joseph Kennedy Jr., who is, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is the son of Robert F. Kennedy, the assassinated U.S. presidential candidate from 1968. We'll see if he can make a dent there. Also, there are serious concerns about Joe Biden's ability to run. Many Democrats, as well as most Republicans, feel that he has suffered suffered too much cognitive impairment due to age to be able to continue as president. That's a very widely held view in the United States. And also, there's this brewing scandal over the Hunter Biden allegations. I mean, the Hunter Biden allegations have been with us for 4 years now. The FBI in the United States has been sitting on his laptop. For 2 years now, we've all been aware of the laptop. For a year now, even Democrats have admitted that the laptop is real. Remember, a year ago, Democrats were still insisting that the laptop was a Russian fake. But now everyone agrees that the laptop is real. There are seriously damning emails and information on the laptop. And now whistleblowers have started coming out from the FBI and the IRS in the United States to testify about the go slow investigations into the Hunter Biden laptop. The real question is, can Joe Biden delay any negative outcomes from the Hunter Biden investigations until after November 2024? I think that's a big ask. To keep these investigations on hold for another year and a half would be an enormous political feat. So Joe Biden faces really serious personal challenges. My own analysis is that he would have stepped down 6 months ago. That I believe the intention was that he would step down after the 2022 midterm elections, except that Kamala Harris, his vice president, is fantastically unpopular. And Kamala Harris has been so unpopular that the Democratic Party don't want to see her as the president or as the presidential candidate. So there's a real bind there. If the election is held between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the polls strongly suggest that Donald Trump would win that election. Now, I know we're a year and a half out, a lot can change in a year and a half, but my own impression is that things can only get better for Trump in a year and a half as people forget about their dislike of Donald Trump, from when he was in office, and things can only get worse for Joe Biden because of his advancing age and the advancing controversies. So my analysis is that the most likely single outcome of the election is a Trump victory, but a lot can happen in a year and a half. I don't have a crystal ball.
Let's see. So, before going into this India's foreign policy as well, Salvatore G, I'll ask you another question based on this election predictions as well. So, how do you see the 2024 Indian elections as well? Because, Prime Minister Modi is eyeing for his third term, and he won both the elections with majority. With after 30 years, the government came with full majority as well. So, how do you see the 2024 elections, Salvatore G?
I can only follow the Indian political analysts here. I don't know Indian politics at the level of districts and voting patterns. All of the Indian analysts seem to agree that the BJP is the party to beat, that Narendra Modi is the man to beat. Look, he has an approval rating over 70%. We can quibble over if it's 72% or 78%, but when you have an approval rating, when you have a prime minister with an approval rating of 70+%, it's going to be a big challenge to knock him off that pedestal. Who knows? It's possible something could happen, but obviously, I'm not offering any deep insights here to say that obviously this looks like a Narendra Modi victory, and the question is, what will the scale of that victory be?
Okay. Let's, as you said, let's wait and see as well. Salvatore Ji, how the world sees, or how do you see the Indian foreign policy of post 2014, let's say, and we will discuss about 2019, post 2019 as well, after the COVID era, from the COVID era as well. So, how does the world sees the Indian foreign policy post 2014, Salvatore Ji?
I think the biggest challenge is likely to be Pakistan. And that may sound counterintuitive because, of course, China is by far larger, is the big enemy. But India's relations with China, while tense, are stable in the sense that the worst thing that could happen with India's relationship with China would be for there to be another confrontation somewhere in the high Himalayas with 10 or 20 or 30 people killed. That would be terrible. It would be unfortunate. Nobody wants to see that. But it wouldn't change anything. Whether one particular mountain ridge changes control, again, won't have any real effect on the larger patterns of India's foreign relations. So China, while it certainly must occupy most of India's strategic interest, is not the wild card. It's not what's going to affect India's foreign policy. The big question is what's going to happen in Pakistan. Everyone is closely following the Imran Khan situation. I'm no expert on Pakistan. I just watch what the experts have to say. But Pakistan is clearly in turmoil with extraordinarily high inflation, with a fiscal crisis of the state, with a conflict between this three-way conflict between the existing civil authorities, the military, and the Imran Khan faction. And you can throw into that, if you want, a nascent Taliban. It's a serious challenge for Pakistan's future stability that there's a Taliban Afghanistan, because the Taliban Afghanistan is almost certainly supporting Taliban-like elements within Pakistan, which would further destabilize the state. And then there are minor conflicts on the edges as well. We could talk about Baluchistan, or these are smaller conflicts going on around the edges of Pakistan. So really, Pakistan is the serious wild card. If there were a change of regime in Pakistan and a Taliban-style Pakistan, Taliban-style overthrow of the government in Pakistan, you could just imagine that would catapult Pakistan to being by far the number one foreign policy challenge for India. Similarly, a naked military takeover in Pakistan would catapult Pakistan to being the top challenge. An Imran Khan return, an irregular Imran Khan return, not via elections, but via a popular revolution, would make Pakistan's stability, again, the number one concern for India. So I think the real attention for the next few years of Indian foreign policy, and the real challenge, is going to be managing the relationship with Pakistan.
Okay. So, do you suggest, or do you think these are the ways, we can improve the relationship with Pakistan?
I don't know how I don't know how you can improve the relationship with Pakistan. A lot depends on Pakistan's internal politics. We live in an era, I mean, we still have international relations scholars who follow Henry Kissinger in analyzing countries as autonomous actors, that each country is pursuing its own national interest. The reality is that in most countries, foreign policy is driven by domestic politics. And you can see that immediately by contrasting Pakistan's relationship with India to Bangladesh's relationship with India. In theory, these are similarly sized countries. Bangladesh has a larger economy. In theory, Bangladesh should be the bigger challenge to India. I mean, it's a bigger economy. It's more stable. It has a strategic situation that's much more threatening to India. Everyone always talks about the chicken neck or the goose neck in India. Well, it's not just China that could challenge that. Bangladesh could challenge that. But the internal politics of Bangladesh are such that Bangladesh is not in any way seeking to enter into a conflict with India. On the other hand, the internal politics of Pakistan are such that we can imagine many different outcomes that would result in a vehemently anti-Indian government taking power in Pakistan. So this isn't really a strategic issue. This isn't really about foreign policy. There's nothing India can do to change that. This is about the domestic politics of India's neighboring countries. And I'm honestly not sure what India can do in this situation, except maybe ask for other friends of Pakistan to step in. So asking for the United States to exert what influence it can. Certainly it can't ask China to do much in Pakistan. But there's nothing India can do directly. After all, what foreign policy could India announce that would have any effect on the domestic situation in Pakistan? I suspect there is none.
Okay. So let's divide this two. I mean, this Modi's era into two period as well, Salvatore. 2014 to 2019. What are the major changes in India's foreign policy, and did India reach out to the world as well, as because Prime Minister Modi visited Israel for the first time, and there was a rousing welcome for in many countries as well, and he won the highest award of the countries in many countries, that is in UAE, Afghanistan, many countries as well. So did Prime Minister Modi change the image of or change the image of the Indian foreign policy in the first 5 years?
Well, first, let's be fair. I haven't counted them up, but I'm sure Manmohan Singh also received many honors and accolades and medals from countries. So, I don't think that's something new. What is new is the rapprochement with Israel, and that rapprochement with Israel, while keeping Arab partners on board. That should be stressed. It hasn't been a rapprochement with Israel creating enemies in the Persian Gulf. It's been a rapprochement with Israel while maintaining good relations with, especially with the United Arab Emirates. So that's a real foreign policy accomplishment. That said, I want to stress I'm not primarily, I'm not an international relations scholar. I'm a sociologist. And what really interests me is the structural factors that have shaped India's international environment. So, for example, the growing Indian economy has dramatically changed India's position vis-a-vis its neighbors, its neighborhood, and China. Now, that growing economy would have occurred even under a Congress administration, right? The economic growth was just a fact of life for an India that is transitioning away from a planned economy into a market economy. And that economic growth has given India greater resources with which to pursue its foreign policies. So, for example, India's bringing the Tejas fighter program to completion, buying the Rafale jets. These are things that India would have had the money for, whether it was a BJP or a Congress government. Now, they may have made different decisions, and instead of Rafales, they may have bought Saab Gripens, instead of the Tejas. There might have been some, but either way, India's strategic position vis-a-vis China would have dramatically improved under either one. Now, I think the Modi government made some really important strategic decisions very early in its government. The number one being to build roads. So, pushing the Border Roads Organization to really connect the Indian frontier, as opposed to the old Congress. I mean, long outdated, but the old Congress strategy of simply pulling back from the frontier. Now, Congress was no longer pursuing that Nehruvian pullback, but still there seemed to be relatively little impetus under Singh to build roads to the frontier. The plans were there, but they were very go slow. Under Modi, starting in 2014, it was immediately get these roads built, get this infrastructure built on the frontiers with China. And I think that's probably made a big difference in India's strategic position vis-a-vis China. But overall, the big story of India's changing position in the world is simply one of a growing economy. And I think that change fundamentally would have happened no matter who was prime minister.
Okay. So, speaking about this international relations or foreign policy, we should definitely speak about our external affairs minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, as well.
Sure.
So, how do you see his performance? Because, he's one such person who is giving very good. Tackling the fake narratives as well. And he's known all over the world, and he's one such best external affairs minister India has got. So, how do you see his performance, Salvatore?
Dr. Jaishankar is an excellent politician.
Okay.
Whether or not that translates into being an excellent foreign minister depends on your point of view. So a lot of what a foreign minister does is public diplomacy, changing the perception of one's country around the world. Now, I know that Dr. Jaishankar has been extremely popular in India. I know that his no-holds-barred, direct, muscular statements of India's national interest have been very well received in India. However, I don't think they've done much to endear international publics to India. So take, for example, his recent performance in vis-a-vis the European Union over the export of Indian refined oil products to Europe, and this question of, can India export refined oil that originated in Russia? Now, he stated a very strong Indian position. He presumably has the legal right behind him. That is, I trust his analysis, his technical analysis of the treaty documents or of the international obligations. But it certainly didn't play well in Europe. That is, if his goal as foreign minister is to convince Europeans that India is a great place that they want to work with, well, I don't think he met that goal. Instead, I think he met the goal of convincing Indians that he's standing up for India in the international arena. Now, those are different goals. What makes for a good foreign minister? Well, that's in the eye of the beholder. Voters may feel that they want their foreign minister to stand up for them in a muscular way. On the other hand, arguably, being a good diplomat means having success in convincing the people of other countries that your country is in the right. And I think on that, no, he hasn't succeeded in convincing Americans or Europeans that India has been in the right in its I won't say support for Russia, but alignment with Russia or lack of condemnation of Russia in the current conflict in Ukraine.
Okay. Like you are saying that based on this Russian Ukraine conflict, that India hasn't condemned very much of for this issue, right?
Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that India should condemn Russia. I'm not saying that
Okay.
India's foreign policy is objectively wrong. I'm simply saying that if you want to evaluate the success of a foreign minister, well, the goal of a foreign minister should be to improve other countries' perceptions of India. And I think that we haven't seen that success.
No, this is the stand of India, Salvatore, because we know that Russia is our very long friend
Mhm.
as well. So that's the stand, and that's the point of India as well. So we are successful in that point of view as well. Don't you agree with that point?
I'm not saying it's the wrong policy. I want you to listen very carefully.
Okay.
A successful foreign minister
Hmm.
would convince other countries
Okay.
that his country is doing the right thing.
Okay. So
Okay.
we done
Now,
that in Kashmir as well, and
now,
we
now,
yeah, yeah.
now,
Tell
now,
me.
now, whether or not India is doing the right thing, that's for you
Ah,
to decide. That's for voters to decide. That's for Indians
okay.
to decide. Okay.
Okay.
Arguably, India is doing the right thing. Other people may argue that it's not doing the right thing. I don't have any position on that.
Okay.
But you asked if he's being successful. Well,
Okay.
successful would mean whatever India is doing, convincing Europeans to agree with India,
Okay.
convincing Americans, and I think we haven't seen that success. We
That's
haven't
not a point
seen.
of Indian interest or Indian narrative, right?
Well, that's the job of the foreign minister.
Okay, no, what
Like,
I'm
why
saying is
have a
like we
you
have
know
our own interest as a country. We have our
yeah.
own interest. We have our own narrative. We have a nation first, and we work on our India's interest, not European interest, right?
Everyone has a right to feel that way, and
Okay,
I don't in any way dismiss those positions. I'm not arguing. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm not arguing against those positions. I'm
okay,
saying that the KPI of a salesman is to sell,
okay,
right? The KPI of a foreign minister is to sell the country's image abroad.
okay,
Now, when a foreign minister goes to Europe, the goal should be whatever India's actual position is. Let's take India's position for granted. India's decided to buy Russian oil, not to publicly condemn Russia, to say that it wants peace, which is good. Everyone wants peace. You know, whatever the policy is, let's say it is. The goal of the foreign minister is to sell that policy in Europe.
okay,
Now, I don't think that he has successfully sold that policy in Europe or in the United States.
okay,
I know it's a difficult sell. Maybe he
okay,
shouldn't have to sell it. Maybe, we can have all these maybes about it, but um, the goal of the foreign minister is certainly to sell these policies, and I just don't think that India has been successful. That Dr. Jaishankar, as much as I admire him and his knowledge and his capacity, if you just want me to give an honest analysis, I don't think he has successfully sold India's position abroad.
okay. So, Salvatore, don't think that I'm arguing with you. Like this is a kind of you are saying from the European perspective or European interest view. We, India as a nation, working
Of
on
course,
Indian interest as well. So then, why should we convince Europe, or why should
yeah,
we convince? We work on the interest of Europe as well.
because you didn't ask me what the right policy is. You asked me, was
Okay,
the foreign minister
that's based on
successful?
the nation,
You
right?
you asked me, was the foreign minister successful?
Okay. See,
Right?
well, let me ask you a question again.
Yes, yes.
If we compare Russia-Ukraine war, that policy is not accepted by other countries as well, but it is acceptable to Russia. They are waging a war on Ukraine as well. Okay, that is acceptable to them. But when we come to India, I'm not comparing the war. We are dealing with the issues. We work on our interest, and we work on our
Sure.
issues, and we work on our narratives. Why should we convince India, and why should our foreign minister convince India for Indian interest? He is working for the Indian interest, not for the European interest, right?
India can have whatever policy it chooses, and I'm not. I think I've been very clear that I'm not condemning the Indian policy. I'm offering an evaluation of the foreign minister's success in selling that policy. And I think that it's very clear that the US public and the European public still perceive India as being in the wrong. I'm not saying India is in the wrong. I'm saying that
Okay.
they perceive India as being in the wrong, and that the foreign minister's job is to change that perception.
Got it. Okay, so we will do the suggestion to our foreign minister Jason Gadji as well. Salvatore ji, one last question. Like as you said, the time till 12:30 you will be available here. So, how is India handling China, or the way that India deals with China as well? Because there has been constant border problems and a major, and before, as you tell, Pakistan, China is also the major problem or major. Neighboring country with the India as well. So how do you see China as well?
India has been the only country in the region that has been successfully pushing back against China. I think other countries have simply run for cover, have allowed their national sovereignty to be compromised, have not wanted to face up to China. And India really has been successfully facing up to China. And here, India has won the war of perceptions. So I think abroad, the rest of the world is very sympathetic to India's position here and very unsympathetic to China's position. So I think this has been a real success of Indian foreign policy and of Indian security policy. India has stopped China in its tracks and has made China pay a real economic price for its aggression on the frontier. That's, I think, unequivocal. It's something that India should be proud of.
Okay. Thank you so much for your wonderful time, Salvatore ji. As you're always ready to there for give us an interview as well. So we will discuss more topics after your Indian Centenary Roundtable program, where our Prime Minister also is coming. So whenever you find time, we'll discuss after your program as well. Thank you so much for your wonderful time, Salvatore ji. Have a great meeting with our Prime Minister as well.
Always a pleasure to talk to you.